Welcome to Lift Your Legacy. My name is Jacob Rupp, father, husband, and rabbi. And each week we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unlock your inner potential and create change that will impact the future. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. Today I'm honored to have Rabbi Mordechai Becher, author of what I hold to be the greatest book in the field of outreach. And if you want to teach basic Jewish concepts in a very relatable way to new Jews and to old Jews. So thank you very much for writing that book. Rabbi Becher is also a senior lecturer at Gateways Yeshiva University. He has his own television show, Dimensions of the Daf. In your career, working with Jewish people, why have you come to where you are now? How have you come to where you are now? And why do you think this is the most effective way of promoting Jewish content?
My teacher in Israel was Rabbi Shapiro, alav shalom. And he was very much a believer in teaching Jews emunah, teaching them belief in God, teaching them about the Torah, and reaching out to non-observant Jews. He encouraged me to go to an outreach seminar in Australia, which I actually did together with Rabbi Jeff Wogelanter, who's in San Diego. It's also where I met my wife, who's from Philadelphia, who was also doing this outreach seminar.
This is a good deal for you.
It was great. As a result of that experience in this outreach seminar, which was actually in Sydney, it's called Counterpoint, I got interested in teaching.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with Rabbi Shapiro. Please tell me a little bit about what that experience was like, how you found him, and how the relationship with him developed over the course of your career.
Well, it was really gifted to myself and many other students. We were in a yeshiva called, one of the Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Shapiro. He was brought in to be a Rosh Yeshiva there. He was not yet world famous at the time, which was wonderful. So we had about 6-7 years where there was a group of probably about 40 of us, and he would give a Gemara shir, and we'd be able to talk to him. He was involved in our lives, in our shidduchim, and in every aspect of it. It was amazing. So we had this window of opportunity to have a great relationship with a person who we normally would not have had access to under normal circumstances. And then continued, he gave these public classes we used to go to, his famous Thursday night class. Then when I started teaching at Or Sameach, Rabbi Tatz, Rabbi Newman, and I all were teaching at Or Sameach. We approached Rabbi Shapiro and asked him to give a class for teachers at Or Sameach. I said, we're always giving out Torah. We need some more input. And he said, Atem rotzim et zeh or tzrichim et zeh? Do you want this or need it? We said, tzrichim et zeh, we need it. He says, if so, fine. He did that class for over 20 years.
Wow.
30 years probably. And the laws of Talmud Torah and the Rambam, Perek Chelek, in Sanhedrin, many, many issues. And it was amazing. So we got another chance, even though we were teaching, to be students of his. And most people kept contact with him throughout our lives.
How necessary is that? Because one of the benefits and shortcomings of having this very widely spread out Jewish community is that a lot of times you don't have a long-term relationship with an Adam Gadol, with a great person. And, you kind of pick and choose your rabbis, and you listen to this, you listen to that. But the experience of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like he really knew you, and he was kind of like the person that you went to that was able to offer that insight you were looking for. What was that like? How did you develop that relationship personally with him? Obviously having access to him over a period of time.
We were there every day. We were in his class every day. Most of us, my parents were in Australia. People's parents were in South Africa, in the United States. So in a sense, he was in loco parentis in many ways. And we would come to him for advice regularly. And sometimes he would call us in to give us advice, but he was accessible. He was very accessible. One of the problems is that people who are very great Torah scholars become more and more inaccessible as time goes on, because they are involved with communal concerns and organizations and so on and so forth. So the average Joe doesn't have the opportunity to have contact with them so much. So you need to develop a relationship with someone who knows you. That's very important. Torah scholar, who's local. Doesn't have to be the greatest person in the generation. Right? Sometimes that's not useful. You know what I mean? There are people who are great Torah scholars, but I wouldn't ask them a question because they don't know me. They don't know my circumstances. They may not know a circumstance outside B'nai Brak. So, you know, I mean, it's important to have someone who knows your circumstance. I mean, you know, and thank God we have things like phones. You know, if I have a halachic question, there are people I can consult over the phone, like, you know, David Cohen in Flatbush. Fortunately, thank God, I'm at Yeshiva University. I get a chance to speak to Rav Herschel Schachter, who is, you know, one of the great poskim of our generation. So so Baruch Hashem, I've been blessed with that type of opportunity.
It's a very interesting point that you brought up about the, and this doesn't have necessarily be everybody's experience, but certainly the experience of, you know, an American going to Eretz Yisrael to learn, that experience of feeling that you have to connect to the Gadol in B'nai Brak, or that's what normal looks like. And what you're saying is that really that's not productive in a lot of cases, and a person should essentially remove that as a requirement or an area, and to really try to dig in to find someone that's nearby to you and kind of understands your specific circumstance. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's inspiring to see these people, and it's inspiring to, you know, if you want to ask for a blessing for them to pray. But in terms of regular advice for life and psak halacha, I would want to go to someone who's familiar with local circumstances, familiar with me, familiar with my pressures, familiar with, you know, I believe that halacha should be holistic.
Talk about that, yeah. No, tell me about that, please.
Well, halacha should be holistic in the sense that when someone asks me a question, the answer is not the same for every person. The answer, and a competent rabbi will take into account the person's family circumstances, financial circumstances, so on and so forth. And that has been true for all generations. You look in the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, so you have situations like that. You know, you're supposed to salt, I mean, you know, the butchers salt meat now, but, you know, classic halacha, first thing comes to mind, salting meat is supposed to be sitting in the salt for an hour. So Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch says, but if you forgot to salt the meat and it's Friday afternoon and you've got guests coming, you can rely on the views that say 18 minutes. Because guests coming on Friday afternoon is a consideration. We have an idea, HaTorah chasa al mamoinam shel Yisrael. The Torah is concerned with the money of the Jewish people. I have to be concerned. You know, I had a student who was a chef in New Orleans, somewhere in Louisiana, I think in New Orleans. Now, obviously, you probably know that New Orleans, Louisiana cuisine is almost exclusively non-kosher, right? Literally, I mean, there's, right? Virtually everything in the describing of the Torah as prohibited to eat is a basic ingredient. So this guy had been at Ohr Somayach, and he became observant, and he asked me, he's got a set of knives, what should he do? Now, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch classically says, l'chatchila, ideally you should not kasher a knife, which the knife and the blade, the material, the blade and the handle are made from different materials. So I said, you know, well, ideally you should throw them out, get new ones. He said, it's an $800 set of knives.
Right.
Now, it's the first time I was young, I'd never encountered $800 set of knives. Are you kidding? So I consulted some people, asked, I looked into it, and there is a way to, there is a leniency you can use. But, you know, I mean, you can't just tell someone, better to throw it out. $800.
Right.
Right. So one has to take these things into account, Shalom Bayit, and all these type of things. I think it's important to have contact with someone who does know these, who is familiar with these circumstances.
In your relationship with Rabbi Shapiro, and maybe you can comment on, you know, after he was nifter, like what you did in terms of that void in your own life. How often do you advocate speaking to someone? Do you wait till there's problems? Do you wait? You know,
it's a totally individual thing. I don't think there's a rule. Here. Yeah, I didn't speak to him that often. He was very much into people making their own decisions,
which is hard today because people don't have the confidence to do that.
Right. A good friend of mine, Rabbi Hananya Greenwald, who is the Rosh Yeshiva in Jerusalem, Tiferes Yerushalayim, is a close friend of mine and a student of Rabbi Shapiro. He once had some issue with the yeshiva and he went to ask Rabbi Moshe his opinion. Ramosha told him what he thinks. And Rabbi Greenwald said, yeah, Tov, fine, if that's what the rabbi thinks. And Ramosha says, no. I don't want Hasidim. If you don't agree with me, don't do it. He says, I'm giving you my opinion. If you understand that and it makes sense to you, you should do it. But I don't want Hasidim, right? It's like, so that was a classic Rabbi Shapiro. In other words, he wants you to think for yourself. He'll give you his opinion, he'll give you his guidance, but that's an important, I think, an important part of his chinuch, of his education, was for people to have independent thought.
So how do you nurture that in your students? Meaning that if you're dealing with a person, I mean, who is sort of a child in the world of observant Judaism, and literally you're teaching him, well, this is how you the kinds of foods that you can eat, and really entering this world for the first time with, again, as a grown individual. He's a man, he's done his whole, he has maturity, but then when it comes to Judaism, he's like a child in a lot of ways. How do you nurture within your students the sense that, yes, you have to ask, but at the same time, you really have to have that self-confidence that even in areas of spirituality, when it comes to your family, when it comes to your own practice, that you have to be able to exercise your own opinion?
Well, it is very difficult because they may not have a family tradition, they may not have the knowledge, and there's very few shortcuts, other than my book Gateway to Judaism. But there's very few shortcuts. Thank you very much. Right, there's very few shortcuts to knowledge. You have to build up a knowledge base. You have to have confidence. And that requires a lot of work. It's very difficult to do that, but I think it's necessary. People have to be able to. I encourage people not to necessarily give up on their own individuality. You are supposed to assimilate into the religious community in which you live. If I would be living in Casablanca, I should be acting like a Moroccan Jew. Right? So there is an idea of conforming to the community to some degree, but you have the obligation of individuality. It's very interesting. The Hemek Davar, the Netziv of Volozhin, he writes that it's interesting. You look in the Torah doesn't tell us what the sin of the generation of the Tower of Babel was. It doesn't mention it. It just says, Hashem says, Ata lo yevatzel lahem. I better split up their languages, otherwise they'll succeed in doing what they want to do. But it doesn't actually say at all in the text what they were going to do that was wrong. So there's a lot of discussion about it. The Hemek Davar says, you know what was wrong? It says they spoke the same language. It says Safa Achat, same language, Dvarim Achadim, similar words. So the Netziv says the problem that Hashem saw was they were all the same. And the leaders wanted to build this tower, make sure that no one strays too far away, surveillance, no one goes out of the town, you always find your way back, everyone looks the same, speaks the same, etc. So he says, that's not what Hashem wanted. So therefore, he forced them to split up by creating different languages. So now that they wouldn't be able to communicate, now they'd have individuality. He says, that's what God wants. So it's an amazing thing. So yes, he wants me to observe halacha, but within halacha, it's possible to have there's a diversity, right? You can have everything from Karlsbach to the Frankfurt on Main German Jew, and you can have within Hasidism, there is a vast diversity of different ranges of Hasidic approaches to things, and within the Litvish world, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
It's such an unbelievable perspective, because as we move into a world of social media, and I think that the Jewish community also to a large extent has this situation that we do work very hard to figure out what group we are in. Whenever you're trying to identify yourself, when it comes to, a friend of mine was, going into Shidduchim, and it's like, there's such a nuanced way that you have to define yourself. And he was like, I don't even know what I am. That the world at this time is really trying to pigeonhole themselves into a lot of different causes, and then as a result, not really speaking to the other side. Especially in America, you're seeing with, again, San Diego is a very, unfortunately, largely unaffiliated city. I think something to the tune of 80% of Jews are unaffiliated and don't belong to a synagogue. And they split up very strongly on party lines, to the extent that you literally can have a person that voted Democrat, a person that voted Republican. Both Jews are completely polarized from each other. So how does a person, I guess at this point in Jewish civilization, again, maybe we're going to move out to a more macro concept. Is that a major thing that you should be pushing as a rabbi, as a community leader, and for yourself, that God really wants the individual? Or does there this value of sort of pushing, but join onto this side because there's a certain wisdom over there?
I think there's a combination of both. I think it's very, I can't give you percentages, but there's a combination. Yes, he wants you to be an individual, but he also wants you to be, we know that Judaism is a group communal effort.
Team sport.
Communal effort.
Right. It's a team sport.
Yeah. Maimonides, the Rambam says in Perek Gimel Hilchos Tshuva, he gives an example of an apostate. An apostate, someone who's taken a different religion, mumar in Hebrew. His example is a person who observes the mitzvahs and doesn't do averos, but does it by himself. He doesn't mourn when the community mourns. He doesn't rejoice with the community. He's by himself. So he says such a person is an apostate. That's a heavy term. That's as though he's taken on a different religion. It looks very similar to Judaism. The tefillin are the same, kashrut, Shabbat, but he's not part of the community. So yes, you have to be part of the community, but don't lose your sense of it. That's a challenge to how do you balance those two things. It's great. Like Hasidim have an advantage in terms of community. They're very secure in their identity. I'm an Alexander Chassid. This is my minhag. This is the security in that. But there is a little bit of a loss of individuality, which, right? And that could be a problem. So you want to be able to strike a balance. I don't know. I can't give you a formula of how to do that. But I think I don't know if it's too. I don't know if there's a great benefit in defining myself too much. I am a. But what is it?
Because the day in and day out responsibilities of a person is to really go to with what's appropriate at that time. Is that the concept?
That's right. Yeah, I'm a follower of the schools of Pshischa, Reb Simcha ben Pshischa, his students, the Kotzker Rebbe and the Ishbitzer. It's interesting. I'm actually teaching a course on them at Yeshiva University next semester. So it's interesting. Reb Simcha ben Pshischa and the Kotzker Rebbe didn't write any books because they felt, as the Kotzker Rebbe says, well, what do you mean? What I say is appropriate for this person, this place, and this time.
Right.
For a book, that means it's for everyone at all places, all times. Not really, right? So to some degree, I know I wrote a book, but to some degree, there is that idea that, well, it's very difficult sometimes to give a universal advice. Not so easy.
Sure, but at the same time, it's so hard to find someone that's really spent the time. Again, like we mentioned, that the greater you are in Klal Yisrael, the more difficult you have, that people have access to you. At the same time, there is such a benefit, at least in my mind, to see how great people think and how great people work. Because again, after when like I just think about the Rav Moshe biography, all these biographies that are published, they don't talk about the big stuff. It's all these nuances of, his interaction with this one person. And that really gives you the greatness of the person. So it is, on one hand, I totally understand the concept that I don't want to lock in my ideas, and I don't want to I'm very uncomfortable recording classes because what I say to one audience, I don't want everyone to see necessarily. But at the same time that, we are, to a great extent, we are the leaders of the Jewish people, for at least in my case, for better or for worse. I'm not calling myself a leader of the Jewish people, but, I do speak to people. And a lot of times the lessons that come out, we do need to have kind of a greater exposure to, because people will get other information if it's not coming from us.
Right. Yeah. Look, agreed. But just pragmatically speaking, it's not going to be possible.
Sure. 100%.
You're not going to be able to. So, people have these conventions. You go to this convention, that convention, you can get to hear someone speak and have some relationship with them, but it's not easy. Local rabbis are a good thing.
Good. I wanted to ask two more questions. One fairly broad, from the perspective of someone that has spent so many years in outreach And you mentioned that in the 1980s, Rav Moshe Shapiro was telling you to speak about faith. And you are very clear. One of the reasons I really enjoy your teaching is because you're very clear. You're very philosophical. In the same way that Rabbi David Gottlieb is also very, very clear and coming from an intellectual perspective. As you look back over the span of your career and as you look around at the audiences and how they're changing, do you feel that simple faith model works? Obviously, we're all drawn towards various levels of teaching, but have you shifted how you teach or the essential lesson that you think that a Jewish person needs to hear nowadays versus when you got started?
I didn't use the term simple faith. I spoke about emunah. Emunah is not necessarily simple faith. Emunah is loyalty to truth. That's how Rav Moshe understands. So the word emunah actually means to be loyal to, consistent with. There's a Zohar that says, he is truth, she is emunah. Ihu emes, ihi emunah. There's a marriage between truth and loyalty. So to teach loyalty to truth, but to teach truth is important, and people need to know that the Torah is compelling. It's not just a feeling, but it is true. And I think that aspect, I think, continues to be needed, and we need to teach that. But I think one thing that a lot of people like is to explain the Torah, to explain the mitzvot, to explain the halacha. People hear a halacha or a mitzvah, where's that come from? Right? So I think it's important also to show the origins of things, put things in their historical context, put things in their context of the Masorah of our tradition. I think it's an important part of people's education. I think people enjoy that. History can be boring, but I think we can make it enjoyable, and I think people like that connection to history. One of the classes which I've done around the world is a presentation about the Cairo Geniza, which is the storage room that was in the synagogue, one of the synagogues in Cairo, that has documents dating back to the 11th century, handwritten stuff from Maimonides, Yehuda Halevi, Gaonim, unbelievable stuff. And one of the most beautiful things about that is feeling a connection to our history and feeling that not that much has changed. You can see a kashrut certification from the 12th century. Wow. From the Cairo court on a cheese store.
It's awesome.
You can see ketuvas from the 11th, 12th, 13th century. You can see songs with notes written by Jews in Cairo at that time. There are workbooks, Aleph Beit workbooks by children from 11th, 12th century Cairo with doodles on the side. Wow. Right? So I think one of the things I've moved towards in my teaching is a lot more of the historical context, just to give people a feeling of that sense of connection, of context in history, where I am, where I come from. I think that's very important, and I think people enjoy that.
So perhaps the idea being that so many people, and I've had a couple of conversations with rabbis about trying to change the message for the new generation. What it sounds like you're saying is that the more that we realize that we have very deep roots and that we don't really change over the course of the thousands of years that we've been around, the healthier that is for people, and that we're not necessarily looking for new stuff, but rather we're looking to kind of understand who we are on a much deeper level.
Yeah, I would say, look, things definitely do change, but the deep strengths, powers of the soul, the deep connections we have to the spiritual aspects of the Torah, the mitzvahs, that's consistent. Obviously there's massive change in terms of technology, in terms of finance, in terms of the style of living, socioeconomic, geopolitical circumstances. But the core, the fact that I can still relate to Tefillin and Shabbos, and that a Jew from Babylon, 2nd century, can do that, that hasn't changed. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
What are you the most excited about looking forward to, your future in terms of what you're doing, in terms of your teaching or in terms of the opportunities that are available in the fields of Jewish education?
Well, teaching at Yeshiva University is wonderful, challenging, and I have students from all over the world. And we have, at least in our program called JSS, James Stryer School, very diverse backgrounds. We have a whole bunch of Israeli athletes who are on our sports teams who are completely secular and who for the first time are encountering Judaism.
Wow.
And I'm teaching them, so that's amazing. We have students from Morocco, traditional families. We have students from South America, Panama, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia. Again, traditional backgrounds don't necessarily know that much. We have students from Europe. We have, from wherever I have students from Austria, from Hungary, from France, from Switzerland.
All Jews.
Of course, yes,
yeah.
All Jews. And of course, Americans from all over the United States. And so teaching them every single day is challenging to that's something which I like working on. I'm also, working on deeper understanding of Jewish history. I'm working on a doctorate actually in medieval Jewish history at Yeshiva University, and which is it's a lot of fun. It's hard work, but it's a lot of fun, and I hope that will enhance my understanding. Also, working on trying to understand some more of the Hasidus of Pashischa, and which I very much enjoy, and and also in my local community in Passaic, I do a lot of teaching, which is also very enjoyable. There I can teach on a little bit of a higher level because people do have a background. They have a good background. Most people have been educated well in Mesivtas and yeshivas and seminaries. So I'm not talking to a novice audience. I actually remember of Nachman Bullman, Oliver Shalom, from Or Sameach. Before I left Or Sameach, went to Toronto for 4 years, left Israel. He said to me, Mordechai, I just want to tell you something. He says, for every 10 classes you give to people who have no background, you need to give one class at least to yeshiva students.
Wow.
He says, otherwise you'll end up in the funny farm. So you need to be able to give straight Torah. He says, just straight, right? Don't have to translate everything, he says it's healthy for you, right? So I find that's Passaic provides me with that opportunity, which is very enjoyable as well.
Amazing. How do people follow you? Where is your content that's currently being out there?
Most of the new content is on YU Torah. That's literally YU TORAH. And you put in my name in the search box and you'll come up with, there's a series of 100 classes on Rav Kook on the Siddur. There's a series of, now also close to that, on the 13 Principles of Faith of Maimonides. These are 15-minute bites, by the way. Those series are both, they're 15-minute little chaburas I used to give at YU.
That's awesome.
So, and then there's also longer lectures, regular 1-hour classes, which you'll find there. That will be one place where most of my new content is there. And also the very famous website, Torah Anytime. I'm sure you're familiar with that. They put up my stuff, and you can find it there. And then if you search for the Jewish Broadcasting Service, JBS, Jewish Broadcasting Service, that's where my class Dimensions of the Daf is found. I believe they archive it, and it's on cable television. It's on, it's on cable TV. I don't have cable TV, but I assume if you have it, you should be able to find it.
I don't know if you'd be watching Dimensions of the Daf if you have cable TV, but that's,
you'd be surprised.
Really?
I meet people wherever I travel. Last night I was in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and a couple of people said, "Oh yeah, they watch me on cable TV." I literally wherever I go, I meet
crazy.
people who watch Dimensions of the Daf. I was in Manhattan a couple of years ago, and I forgot which street, 30th Street. A truck is parked there, and this guy, the driver, looks at me out the window. He says, "Rabbi Becher?" And I said, "Yeah." He gets out the truck, and he comes and shakes my hand, and he's clearly not Jewish. Not that truck drivers cannot be Jewish, but he was clearly not Jewish yet. He says, and he said to me, he says, "I'm a Christian Zionist." He says, "Love your Talmud class." Gets back in the truck. Yeah. So I know it's out there, right? So yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, very, very good. I very much appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And, thank you very, very much, Rabbi. There you have it, folks, another inspiring episode. If you enjoyed this, I ask you to please share this with your friends and to like us over on Rabbi Rupp through Facebook or on YouTube. And the more that we're able to get these important messages out, the more that we can really make an impact in the world. So I encourage you, please, to stay tuned. We have a ton of amazing speakers coming up, and also to tell your friends about it. Thank you very much.